The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. Hannah Arendt. You stand in a crowded square. The banners are raised, the music swells, and the people cheer. But listen closer, something is wrong. The cheers are not for freedom. They are not for justice. They are for obedience. This is the paradox that has haunted civilizations for centuries. Why do good people, honest, decent, loving people, become accomplices to tyranny? Evil does not always storm through the gates with fire and blood. More often, it wears a smile. It speaks in polite tones. It cloaks itself in duty, loyalty, tradition. And history proves again and again, the greatest crimes are committed not by monsters, but by clerks, neighbors, fathers, mothers, by the ones who obey without question. Hannah Arendt, the political philosopher who witnessed the Nazi trials, called it the banality of evil. She saw not demons, but men in suits. Men who filed papers. Men who said, "I was just following orders." And yet, centuries before her, Niccolò Machiavelli wrote something that sounded almost like a warning, or a temptation. The ends justify the means. He argued that power is not kept by kindness, but by fear. That a leader who wants stability must master cruelty as a surgeon masters the knife. So here we stand, between Arendt and Machiavelli. Between obedience and ambition. Between the quiet servant who enables evil, and the ruthless ruler who commands it. The question presses down on you like a weight. Which is more dangerous, blind obedience, or calculated cruelty? Which is more responsible for history's darkest hours? You see, this is not an abstract debate. It is not locked in dusty libraries or whispered in philosophy halls. It is alive in you. It lives in the choices you make every day. When you stay silent at injustice. When you laugh at a cruel joke instead of challenging it. When you obey an order at work, knowing it harms another. Arendt's warning whispers. Evil thrives not because of hatred, but because of indifference. Machiavelli's voice counters. The world is ruled not by saints, but by wolves. And in between their voices, your conscience trembles. Because to live is to choose. To choose between comfort and courage. Between survival and truth. Between complicity and rebellion. This is legend's legacy. Here, we do not simply retell history. We drag it into the present. We place it in your hands. And we ask the questions that will not let you sleep. Stay with this story, because what you are about to uncover may shake the very ground beneath your assumptions. You will see why entire societies collapse into darkness not because they are filled with evil men, but because ordinary people turn their eyes away. You will see how psychology itself conspires against your freedom, making obedience feel safer than truth. You will see how history repeats, not because we forget, but because we refuse to believe that we are part of the pattern. The stakes could not be higher. Your silence or your speech. Your obedience or your defiance. Your comfort or your conscience. One truth will haunt you as we go forward. Evil rarely looks evil when it first appears. It looks familiar. It looks normal. It looks safe. And that is why it wins. So, what will you do when the moment comes? Will you obey? Or will you resist? The hidden roots of this question stretch deep into the human mind, into fear, conformity, ambition, and survival. To understand why good people enable evil, we must enter the psychology of power itself. And that is where our journey begins. He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. Friedrich Nietzsche. Why do good people obey evil? Not because they wake up wanting to destroy, but because their minds are caught in traps older than empires. Fear, conformity, survival. These invisible strings guide the human hand more effectively than any tyrant's whip. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic." And that is exactly the danger. We obey because the mind seeks safety in what feels familiar. Because resisting power feels like standing against the tidal wave with bare hands. Think of the Milgram experiment. Ordinary people pressed buttons that they believed delivered deadly shocks, simply because a man in a white coat said, "Continue." No gun. No chains. Just authority. And still, they obeyed. This is the psychology Arendt revealed. Evil does not require hatred in the heart. It only requires obedience in the mind. The Nazi officer at trial was not a raging beast. He was a bureaucrat. A man who said, "I did my duty." But Machiavelli would smirk at this naivety. He would say, "Of course they obey." That is the essence of power. Men are weak, selfish, and afraid. They must be ruled, or they will destroy themselves. For him, fear is not an accident. It is a tool. And the ruler who does not use it will be devoured. Here lies the hidden tension. The people think they are protecting order by obeying. The rulers think they are protecting power by commanding. And in the middle, morality suffocates. Schopenhauer wrote, "Compassion is the basis of morality. But compassion is fragile in the face of fear. The human brain is wired for survival. It calculates risk faster than it calculates justice. And when your survival feels threatened, even slightly, compassion is the first to die." Look around you. In workplaces, people obey bosses they despise because paychecks feel safer than protest. In governments, citizens swallow lies because stability feels safer than chaos. In families, silence prevails because peace feels safer than conflict. This is the hidden root. It is not that people love evil, it is that they love safety more than they love truth. But here is the dark psychology. Safety is an illusion. You obey, thinking you protect yourself. But in reality, you become the very instrument of your own chains. Nietzsche warned, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster in the process." Yet obedience ensures precisely that. The good man, desperate to avoid chaos, becomes the silent accomplice of cruelty. The citizen, craving peace, becomes the enabler of tyranny. And Machiavelli would whisper from the shadows, "This is exactly how power must function. The flock obeys because it fears the wolf. The prince survives because he chooses fear over love." Do you see it now? The roots are not just political. They are psychological. They live inside you. Every time you choose silence over confrontation. Every time you justify obedience as, "Not my responsibility." Every time you convince yourself it is better to be safe than to be free. Evil does not need to shout. It only needs you to nod. And history has proven, the nod is deadlier than the sword. But what happens when millions nod at once? When entire societies surrender their conscience for comfort? When silence becomes the law and obedience becomes the virtue? The consequences are not distant. They are not abstract. They are here. They are now. And they will drag you into their darkness, unless you dare to see what comes next. The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in times of great moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. Dante Alighieri. What happens when silence multiplies? When obedience spreads like a plague. When good people, seeking safety, become the gears of a machine they do not control? Entire civilizations collapse into darkness. Not with a single shout, but with a million whispers of, "It's not my problem." You think tyranny is built by tyrants. But look closer. It is built by ordinary people. The schoolteacher who keeps quiet. The neighbor who looks away. The clerk who stamps the papers. The soldier who follows orders. One by one, they surrender their conscience. One by one, they trade freedom for comfort. One by one, they feed the beast that will one day devour them. This is the unseen consequence Arendt warned about. Evil thrives not because it is strong, but because it is ordinary. It seeps into daily life. Into routines. Into systems. Into the small compromises you make to avoid trouble. And once it has you, it does not stop. It grows. It consumes. It rewrites your reality until obedience no longer feels like betrayal, it feels like virtue. Consider Nazi Germany. The trains ran on time. The bureaucrats filed their reports. The people waved flags and sang songs. On the surface, it looked orderly, patriotic, even moral. But beneath the surface lay death camps. And those camps did not run on hatred alone. They ran on silence, on paperwork, on the obedience of thousands who thought, "This is just my job." Now look at your world. Think you are safe? That this belongs only to history books? Look closer. Conformity thrives in boardrooms, in parliaments, in schools, in digital platforms. Cancel culture, corporate obedience, surveillance, each demands silence. Each punishes dissent. Each rewards compliance. And you are told this is for your safety. But here is the trap. By obeying to protect yourself, you erode the very freedom you sought to preserve. By staying silent, you guarantee that when the hammer finally falls, there will be no one left to speak. Psychology explains why. The brain is wired with cognitive biases that make obedience natural. The status quo bias convinces you that keeping things the same is safer than changing. The authority bias tells you that leaders must know better than you. The bystander effect whispers that someone else will act, so you don't have to. And slowly, you become a shadow in your own story. A passenger in a vehicle racing toward disaster. Not guilty, perhaps, but not innocent either. Nietzsche saw it clearly. In individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. Society itself becomes mad. And you, thinking you are safe, are swept away by the current of collective obedience. This is why the unseen consequences are so dangerous. They are not written in blood at first. They are written in silence. They are written in fear. They are written in the small compromises you make today that become the atrocities of tomorrow. You are not outside this story. You are inside it. Every time you obey for comfort. Every time you remain neutral in the face of wrong. Every time you choose peace over truth, you become part of the machine. And the machine never forgives. Once you feed it, it demands more. Until one day, the very safety you sacrificed everything to protect is gone. That is the destiny of societies built on obedience. First they submit. Then they vanish. But is this fate inevitable? Are we condemned to repeat the same pattern forever? Obedience, silence, destruction? Or is there another path? The answer lies in rebellion. Not rebellion of violence, but rebellion of the mind. The courage to think. The courage to resist. The courage to say no when the world expects you to bow. And that is where our journey turns next. The most courageous act is still to think for yourself. Aloud. Coco Chanel. The machine of obedience is powerful. It crushes dissent. It rewards silence. It whispers safety. But history shows, there are always a few who break free. And when they do, the world trembles. Socrates stood before the Athenians. They demanded silence. They demanded obedience. But he drank poison rather than betray truth. His death was not defeat, it was rebellion. A reminder that conscience can defy an empire. Machiavelli would scoff. He would say that such idealism is weakness. That power bows to no philosopher. But Arendt would remind him, every tyrant fears one thing above all, a mind that refuses to obey. The rebellion begins not with weapons, but with thought. To see through illusions. To recognize manipulation. To reject the comfort of conformity. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you cannot become who you are while bowing to lies. You cannot discover your truth while hiding in obedience. You must rebel against the self that craves safety more than freedom." Consider Václav Havel in Czechoslovakia. A playwright. Not a soldier. Not a king. Yet his refusal to speak the language of propaganda broke the spine of a regime. He called it living in truth. And truth was rebellion. Look deeper. Every tyrant depends on conformity. The moment you choose conscience over silence, you shatter their spell. You remind others that they too can resist. And rebellion spreads, one voice, then two, then thousands. But here lies the paradox. To rebel is to risk everything. To stay silent is to lose everything slowly. Which is worse? Machiavelli would say, calculate. Choose the risk that secures your survival. If silence keeps you alive, embrace silence. If rebellion wins power, embrace rebellion. For him, morality bends to strategy. But Arendt would shake her head. She would say that to survive without conscience is not survival at all. That when you surrender your freedom, you surrender your humanity. And here is the hard truth: breaking free requires pain. The pain of being mocked. The pain of losing friends. The pain of standing alone. But this pain is the seed of dignity. Without it, you are only a shadow of yourself. Dark psychology offers weapons for rebellion too. The same biases that keep you silent can be reversed. Authority bias? Challenge it. Question leaders, even the ones you admire. Bystander effect? Break it. Act first when others hesitate. Status quo bias? Shatter it. Do not cling to comfort. Comfort is the cage. And discipline, always discipline. The rebels of history did not survive by impulse. They trained their minds. They mastered fear. They accepted sacrifice. Marcus Aurelius, a ruler himself, once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That is the heart of rebellion. Not the sword. Not the banner. But the mind that refuses to be owned. So the choice stands before you. You can obey, and vanish into history's shadows. Or you can rebel, and stand where the light meets the darkness. The world does not need more obedient citizens. It needs more dangerous thinkers. More voices willing to speak. More souls who value truth above safety. But rebellion is not the end of the story. For once you break free, once you resist, you are confronted with the ultimate question: what now? If obedience builds tyranny, and rebellion breaks it, what is the final truth that lies beyond both? That answer will demand everything from you. Because it is not simply political. It is existential. It is the truth that will decide not only the fate of nations, but the fate of your soul. And that is where we go next. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Edmund Burke. So we return to the question that has haunted every empire, every age, every soul: why do good people enable evil? And more importantly, how do they stop? The answer is not simple. It is not obedience versus rebellion. Not Arendt against Machiavelli. It is something deeper, something hidden beneath both power and fear. The truth is this: evil thrives wherever conscience is outsourced. Whenever you let another person, another ideology, another authority think for you, you surrender the only weapon that truly matters: your mind. Arendt saw it clearly during the Nazi trials. The man on trial was not a monster. He was ordinary. Terrifyingly ordinary. And that was the revelation. Evil requires no hatred, no rage. It requires only thoughtlessness. The refusal to think. But Machiavelli, standing in his Renaissance study, would grin. He would argue that thinking alone is not enough. That the world does not bend to philosophers, but to those who act decisively. He would say, "Virtue, strength, cunning, boldness, this is what bends fortune to your will." So here is the final paradox. Thought without action is useless. Action without thought is dangerous. Only when conscience and courage unite does freedom emerge. This is the ultimate truth. You must dare to think, and dare to act on that thought. Without thought, you become the obedient servant of evil. Without courage, you become the impotent dreamer who watches evil spread. But with both, you become dangerous to tyranny. Dangerous to conformity. Dangerous to the machine that thrives on silence. Viktor Frankl, who survived the camps, left us the most vital reminder. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Choice. That is the power no tyrant can steal. That is the light evil cannot extinguish. That is the truth that transforms obedience into defiance, silence into speech, fear into strength. But here is the haunting question you cannot escape. When your moment comes, will you choose safety or conscience? Will you obey, or will you resist? The world does not change because tyrants rise. It changes because ordinary people choose not to follow them. Because someone, somewhere, decides to think, to speak, to act. And now the voices of our two legends speak one last time, leaving you with a choice that cannot be avoided. Hannah Arendt warns, "The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil." Niccolò Machiavelli counters, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." Two truths. Two visions of the world. Two roads before you. Which one will you walk? This is the legacy of legends. Not to give you answers, but to leave you with the weight of the question. Because history is not finished. It is unfolding in your choices. In your silence. In your courage. In you. So tell me, whose ideology speaks to you more? The warning of Arendt, or the ruthless clarity of Machiavelli? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your words matter more than you think. And if you seek more journeys like this, subscribe to Legends Legacy. Because the battle for the human soul is not ancient history. It is here. It is now. And it begins with you.